by the, this was interrupted in 87 by the Indo-Lanka Accord. After 83, there was this major change because there was this huge anti-Tamil pogrom in 83, which basically changed the conflict into a civil war. But in 87, the Indian government intervened and had this accord, which brought the fighting to a temporary halt. But what happened then was, within a few months, it broke out again in the north and east between the Indian Army and the LTT. And in the south, you had this really horrendous crackdown on the, supposedly on the JVP as Sinhalese militant movement, which arose in, which had an insurrection in 87. But in the name of cracking down on that, all dissidents was crushed, and very brutally. I mean, disappearances, murders, torture were the order of the day. And tens of thousands of people were killed and disappeared in the south, in the Sinhalese. So basically you have these, the rise of identity politics then is identified with the, also with the destruction of democracy, both within the Tamil community as well as within the Sinhalese community. Okay, now, I don't have much longer. After Chandrika Kumaratunga came to power in 1994, there was a genuine attempt to restore democracy in the South, as well as a serious attempt to resolve the ethnic problem, which looked at the real, the way in which the rights of minorities had been gradually and drastically cut away. And she attempted to have a political solution, a different constitution, which would change this. Now that was scuttled on two sides, both by the opposition, the UNP, which as always in the past opposed it and did not allow it to go through. Also by the LTT, which did not come out in support of what was essentially a federal, a constitution which would give a large degree of devolution to the Tamil majority areas and which would protect the rights of minorities. So you had, then you had the war starting all over again. Then you had, again, the ceasefire in 2002, mediated by the Norwegians, which had its positive moments, but again, overall, when we look back on it, and at the time some of us saw it coming, was a disaster because it did not, in the first place, it did not take human rights seriously. And in the second place, it did not take a political solution to the conflict seriously. There was no progress made on either of these fronts. And that basically meant the LTT gained a great deal of strength in this time. They eliminated many of their critics, unarmed critics, and they went on conscripting children, so nothing was stopped. But this strengthening of Tamil nationalism had its counterpart in the strengthening of Sinhalese nationalism at this time. I mean, people did not express it maybe so openly, but it was growing. And so when the war broke out again, as it almost inevitably did, you had this extremely vicious conflict, which with no holds barred on both sides. And I think I have to stop there because well, now some of the left, which had split off from the, I'll just split and then stop. Some of the left parties, now some sections of the left parties had split when the main leadership went over along with Sinhala chauvinism. There were obviously sections which split off And at this time, especially during the peace process, the Norwegian mediated peace process, and maybe earlier, many of them had come round in an implicit way to support the claims of the LTT for a separate Tamil state. Now, their rationale for this was that they have a right to self-determination, and taking that from from the whole debate on self-determination earlier on in the Communist Party. Now, I think there is a tendency to take in the left to take positions in a very doctrinal way without looking at the context, without looking at the complexities of situations. I think when Lenin argued for the right of nations to self-determination, he made it clear it was not a blanket rule. He was talking about situations of imperialism, basically. And in that context, I think it makes perfect sense that you must say that the dominated nations, the colonized nations, have a right to self-determination. I mean, today, if you look at situations like Iraq or Afghanistan or Palestine, I think we have to argue for the right of self-determination in these cases. But when Rosa Luxemburg opposed it, she made it very clear that she was not opposed to fighting against oppression of one nation by another. She said socialists are opposed to all oppression, and therefore also of oppression by one nation, of one nation by another. What she was saying was, you do not have to support a right-wing reactionary leadership which is fighting for a separate state if it is opposed to the interests of the working people of that country. And I think that that fits the situation in Sri Lanka, the LTT and the Tamil people, that the LTT was an extreme right-wing force who was fighting, which was fighting for a separate state. It was not what the majority of Tamil people in Sri Lanka wanted. They wanted security, they wanted dignity, they wanted equality. They did not necessarily want a separate state. And if they did, at one point, if it appeared as if you could not get those things, security, equality, dignity, etc., without a separate state, they were not asking for an exclusively Tamil state. Now, this is where the identity politics comes in, because an exclusively Tamil state meant, among other things, that they attacked Muslims, Tamil-speaking Muslims. They slaughtered them in the east. They ethnically cleansed some 75,000 Muslims from the north, gave them 24 to 48 hours to pack up and leave. And to this day, many of them are still refugees or internally displaced people. So this was not something which the majority of Tamil people in Sri Lanka would support, not this notion of a Tamil state. So they might maybe at one point, would have thought of a separate state as a refuge. They did not want it to be this kind of extremely totalitarian and exclusive state. So I think this argument about the right to self-determination really doesn't, in this particular instance, it does not justify the LTT politics. So I think, to conclude, I think that so long as we have this paradigm of identity politics, Sinhala nationalism on one side and Tamil nationalism on the other, there is no resolution to the conflict in Sri Lanka. I cannot see it ever coming, because each one is exclusive, each one is supremacist. It wishes to establish a totalitarian grip over its own people and separate its supposed own people from all others, have some absolute separation, which is sort of symbolized in a border, which is not appropriate in Sri Lanka, where people have lived, intermingled together, intermarried for centuries, if not millennia. The other thing is also it ignores all the other forms of oppression which are taking place, the horrendous oppression of women, of children, the oppression against workers, and so on. Caste oppression is all swept under the carpet with this one thing of ethnic nationalism.